I handed my son the keys to our home, and he locked me in the basement like I was just an old box he didn't want to deal with. It happened the very same day I handed him the deed. 1 minute, I was serving him coffee cake at the kitchen table where I raised him. The next, he was herding me down to the cold, unfinished basement, calling it more comfortable for someone my age. They took my recliner where I used to rock him as a baby and dragged it downstairs. Told me not to come up while the contractors made changes. That first night, the door at the top of the stairs locked with a soft, final click. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that David, my only son, had my best interests at heart. But then I heard him on the phone, whispering about selling the house. He told the agent I'd inherited it and didn't mention I was still alive, still living under his roof. I stayed quiet, packed my things, but I hadn't packed everything, because what he didn't know was that one call, just one, could ruin everything he thought he'd stolen. But before we begin, dear, comment under this video where in the world you're watching from today. Now let's start from the beginning. I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me. Isn't that what all foolish old women say? But there I was, Margaret Wilson, 70 years old with arthritic fingers and a heart full of misplaced trust, about to hand over everything to my only son. That morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that recalls all seasons past. I'd woken early, too excited to sleep. I'd spent the week sorting through old photos, reminiscing about the life Frank and I built in this craftsman with the wraparound porch. 43 years of memories between these walls. "Are you sure, Maggie?" Frank would have asked if he were still here. My husband, gone 10 years now, was always cautious. "Of course I'm sure," I whispered to his memory while smoothing my blouse. "It's David, our son." I had the deed ready in a worn blue folder I'd used for decades. I ran my fingers over the embossed title, feeling a flutter in my chest. Not nervousness, I decided, just emotion. David arrived at 10 sharp, every inch the successful lawyer in pressed slacks and button-down. He'd always been handsome, with Frank's jaw and my hazel eyes. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. He smelled expensive. "You're looking well." "I made your favorite coffee cake," I said, leading him to the kitchen where sunlight spilled across our old oak table. The same table where I'd helped with homework, celebrated birthdays, where Frank and I had planned our dreams. "Great, but let's be quick. Meeting at 1. David checked his watch, worth more than Frank made in a month. I tried not to let his hurry dampen my spirits. "Of course, honey." We sat with the folder between us. I poured coffee into the good cups with tiny roses Frank gave me for our 25th. "I've been thinking about this a long time," I began steadily. "Your father and I always wanted this house to stay in the family. With me getting older, it makes sense to put things in order." David nodded, eyeing the folder. "It's practical." "Practical," I echoed, though it meant so much more. Legacy, trust, family. "Your father would be proud you'll care for the place we loved." I slid the folder across, fingers lingering. "The deed's signed. I've seen the lawyer. The house is yours now." Something flickered across his face before quickly vanishing. "Thanks, Mom." He barely glanced inside before tucking it away. "You won't worry about maintenance or taxes anymore." "I never minded those," I laughed. "Your father taught me well." David checked his watch again. "Kayla's coming later with ideas for the house. She's dying to update things." My heart skipped. "Update? What kind?" Nothing major, he said, avoiding my eyes. Just modernizing. The kitchen's dated and the bathrooms. I nodded, trying to be open-minded. I'm sure Kayla has wonderful taste. David finished his coffee in one gulp and stood. Got to run. I watched him drive away, feeling strangely hollow despite accomplishing exactly what I'd planned. David and Kayla returned at 3, bringing energy that pushed against my home's quiet rhythm. Margaret, Kayla air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume sharp. We're so excited about this new chapter. I smiled despite my tension. Would you like some tea? No time, David said decisively. Mom, we need to talk about arrangements. Arrangements? I followed them into my living room, where Kayla eyed my sofa with distaste. Living arrangements, David clarified, standing rather than sitting. We're moving in right away. The floor seemed to tilt. Right away? But I thought, it makes sense, he continued in his lawyerly tone. The commute is killing me, and now that the house is officially ours— Yours, Kayla corrected with a tight smile. We want to settle in, David finished. You'll be more comfortable in the basement apartment. You won't have to deal with stairs. Basement apartment? The cold, unfinished space for tools and decorations? That's not an apartment, David. It's a basement. It has that bathroom Dad installed, he said dismissively. We'll help you move your essentials today. Today. The word echoed like a slammed door. I don't understand, I said softly. I thought I would stay in my bedroom, that we would share. Kayla laughed harshly. That wouldn't be practical. We need space, and honestly, Margaret, at your age, fewer stairs is better. The basement is cold, I protested weakly, and dark. We'll get you a space heater, David said, moving toward the stairs. Let's start with your clothes and recliner. What followed was a blur, my protests fading as they dismantled my life. My recliner, where I'd rocked David as a baby, was dragged down the narrow steps. Boxes of clothes followed, with my lamp and a thin blanket. This should do for now, Kayla said with brisk satisfaction. I stood on the concrete floor, surrounded by meager remnants of my life, feeling trapped in someone else's nightmare. The bare bulb cast harsh shadows. The air smelled of mildew. David, I began, trembling. I don't think— It'll be fine, Mom, he interrupted, backing toward the stairs. Contractors are coming tomorrow. Stay down here so you're out of their way. Then they were gone. I heard murmurs, laughter, furniture moving across floors Frank had refinished by hand. I sank into my recliner, pulling the thin blanket around me. Surely this was temporary. Surely David didn't mean for me to live here indefinitely. He was my son, my only child, the boy who once made Mother's Day cards with too much glitter. Then I heard it. A key turning in a lock, the door at the top of the stairs. My stomach dropped as realization hit me like a blow. They had locked me in. I tried to make the best of things that first night. I'd always been practical. That's what Frank used to say. Margaret, he'd tell me with that crooked smile, you could make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. But as I lay on the makeshift bed they'd created by pushing 2 old ottomans together, I couldn't find the silk in this situation. The basement pipes groaned overhead, a constant reminder of the life continuing without me upstairs. Each creak and thump translated in my mind. That's the 3rd stair, the one that always squeaked. That's the water running in my bathroom. Kayla's bathroom now. That's the sound of my kitchen cabinets closing. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the chill that seeped through the thin blanket. I hadn't realized how cold it got down here at night. Frank had always talked about insulating the basement properly, but after his heart attack 10 years ago, those plans had died with him. Morning brought no relief. I woke stiff and disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was until the concrete walls reminded me. The small basement window near the ceiling let in a rectangle of pale light that did little to warm the space. I made my way upstairs, relieved to find the door unlocked. Perhaps last night had been a mistake. Perhaps today would bring clarity. The kitchen, my kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals, had been transformed overnight. Boxes of their belongings sat on counters. Kayla was already there, tapping away at her phone while sipping from one of my good teacups. "Good morning," I ventured. She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face as if she'd forgotten I existed. "Oh, morning." I moved toward the refrigerator, suddenly aware I was still in my nightgown, in my own kitchen. "I thought I'd make some breakfast." "We're having a contractor come look at the kitchen today," she said, not looking up from her phone. "So try not to make a mess." A mess in my own kitchen. I bit back words that would have made Frank raise his eyebrows in shock. I opened the refrigerator to find it reorganized. My heart sank as I noticed small adhesive labels on containers. David and Kayla written in neat block letters. Even the milk carton bore their names. Is there anything I can eat?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Kayla sighed, finally looking up. "There's bread in the pantry, and I think there's some of that old jam you like. We'll need to figure out a food budget soon, by the way. David thinks it makes sense to split the groceries." Split the groceries. In the home I had just given them. The home where I'd fed my son for 30 years without ever once calculating the cost. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. I would wake in the damp chill of the basement, make my way upstairs to find most food labeled or saved for something special. Conversations died when I entered rooms. Plans were discussed as if I weren't there. "We should replace these old curtains," Kayla would say, fingering the drapes I'd sewn myself. "And this carpet has to go," David would agree, standing on the rug where he'd taken his first steps. Mealtimes were the worst. When I did join them at the table, my oak table that Frank had refinished the year before he died, conversation was stilted and brief. "How was work?" I'd ask David. "Fine," he'd reply before turning to Kayla. "Did you call about the bathroom tiles?" I became a ghost in my own home, drifting between rooms where I no longer belonged. At night, I'd retreat to the basement, where the cold air made my joints ache and the pipes creaked like they were sharing secrets I couldn't understand. On the 5th morning, I was making my way quietly up the basement stairs when I heard Kayla's voice, sharp and clear from the kitchen. I know," she was saying, her tone hushed but irritated. "We're working on getting her out soon. David just needs a little more time." I froze, one hand on the railing. "It's not ideal for me either," she continued, having her underfoot constantly, looking at me with those sad eyes, like I'm the villain in some Lifetime movie. A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "The deed's already transferred, so that's done at least. Now it's just a matter of, no, I don't think she suspects anything. She's too trusting, always has been, according to David." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I sank down onto the step, my heart hammering against my ribs. Getting her out soon. The deed's already transferred. The words echoed in my head as I quietly retreated down the stairs, back to my cold corner of what used to be my home. That night, lying in the dark, listening to the house settling above me, I finally allowed myself to face what I'd been denying. The thin blanket did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's poor insulation. I remembered how quickly David had suggested the basement after getting the deed, how Kayla had never once called this our home, but always their home. The labels on the food, the locked door that first night, the whispered phone conversation. I wasn't a beloved mother being cared for. I wasn't a welcome presence in a multi-generational home. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle, something to be worked on and gotten out soon. Tears slid silently down my cheeks, soaking into the makeshift pillow. Frank would have been furious. Frank would have known what to do. But Frank wasn't here, and I'd given away our home with nothing but a trusting heart and a mother's love. In the damp dark of the basement, surrounded by boxes of Christmas ornaments and Frank's old tools, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I was no longer welcome in my own home. My son and his wife were deliberately isolating me, pushing me out inch by inch, and I had no idea what to do about it. A week passed in that strange limbo. I existed in the shadows of my own home, trying to make myself useful, trying to pretend this arrangement was normal. I washed dishes that weren't mine, dusted furniture I could no longer claim, and did laundry for a son who barely acknowledged my presence. That Tuesday afternoon, I gathered the clean laundry, my few possessions, and some of David's shirts I'd noticed in the basement hamper. Old habits die hard, I suppose. I'd always done his laundry, even after he moved out. Some part of me thought that continuing these small acts of mothering might remind him of who I was, who we had been to each other. The basket was heavy against my hip as I climbed the basement stairs. My knees protested each step, another reminder that at 70, I wasn't getting any younger. I paused at the landing to catch my breath, shifting the weight of the basket. That's when I heard David's voice from the hallway above. "Just say it was inherited. Don't mention she's still living here." His words were hushed, careful, the tone people use when they're saying things they shouldn't. "Look, it's technically mine now. The deed's been transferred." A pause. "I understand your concerns, but it's completely legal." Another pause. I stood frozen, the laundry basket suddenly weightless in my trembling hands. The market's hot right now, and this neighborhood is only going up in value. We're talking at least $800,000, maybe more. $800,000 for the home Frank and I had bought for $42,000 back in 1979. The home where we'd raised our children, where Frank had died. I know, David continued, his voice moving slightly as if he were pacing. "We just need to time the showings when she's occupied elsewhere. Kayla's working on that part." The blood drained from my face so quickly, I had to grip the railing to stay upright. My son, my David, was trying to sell my home out from under me, while I was still living in it. "Listen, just get the listing ready. We'll figure out the details." His voice dropped even lower. "She doesn't have anywhere else to go. She'll have to accept whatever arrangement we offer." I backed down the stairs as quietly as I could, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he would hear it. 1 step, 2. The 3rd step creaked, that same stubborn step that had announced teenage David's midnight snack raids all those years ago. I froze. "Hello?" David called. "Mom, is that you?" I couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't face him knowing what I now knew. Must be the house settling, I heard him mutter before continuing his conversation in an even lower voice. Somehow I made it back to the basement, set the laundry basket down, and sank onto my recliner. The room swam before my eyes as David's words echoed in my mind. Just say it was inherited. Don't mention she's still living here. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pressed them between my knees, trying to steady myself, trying to think, but all I could feel was the sharp, jagged edge of betrayal cutting through everything I thought I knew about my son. How could he? How could he? I'd changed his diapers, kissed his scraped knees, stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I'd worked extra shifts at the elementary school to help pay for his law school. I'd been so proud when he passed the bar exam, when he joined that prestigious firm. And now he was using those same legal skills to, what? Evict me? Sell my home while I was still in it? Night fell, and I paced the basement, unable to sleep, unable to be still. The concrete floor was cold through my slippers. The walls seemed to close in around me. Each creak above, David or Kayla moving around, sent a jolt of anxiety through my chest. What would happen when they found buyers? Would they force me into some retirement home? Or worse, would they simply put my things on the curb one day while I was out getting groceries? I had no money for lawyers, no family left besides David, no friends close enough to take me in. Frank and I had always lived modestly, putting everything into this house and David's education. The house was supposed to be my security, my nest egg. And I had given it away, just handed it over with a smile and a hug. Around 3 a.m, I found myself standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, looking up at the door that led to my home. No, David's home now. Legally his. The enormity of my mistake crashed over me like a wave. My chest felt tight. I couldn't seem to get enough air. Was this what a heart attack felt like, or just heartbreak? I sank down onto the bottom step, buried my face in my hands, and let the tears come. Not the quiet, dignified tears of that first night, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I muffled them with my sleeve, terrified that David might hear, might come down and find me like this, broken and afraid. But no one came. No one heard. I was alone with the knowledge that my own son was plotting against me, measuring the value of brick and timber against the inconvenience of his mother's continued existence. When morning came, I washed my face in the small basement bathroom sink, put on my brightest sweater, and went upstairs as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't spent the night pacing and crying, as if I didn't know. David was already gone, off to his law office to arrange who knows what other betrayals. Kayla barely looked up from her phone when I entered the kitchen. "Morning," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She replied, scrolling through something that made her smile slightly. I wondered if they were house listings, if she was already picking out new furniture for when I was gone. I poured myself a cup of coffee, unlabeled, thankfully, and stared out the kitchen window at the garden I'd tended for 40 years. The rose bushes needed pruning. Would the new owners know to cut them back before the first frost? Would they notice how the eastern exposure made the breakfast nook glow golden in the morning? Would they ever know that a family had loved this house, that it had sheltered us through storms and celebrations, through grief and joy? And what would become of me? I waited until both David and Kayla left the house the next morning before reaching for the phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, afraid they might return and catch me. Lorraine answered on the third ring. "Well, This is a nice surprise. How are you, Margaret?" The sound of her warm, familiar voice nearly undid me. I'd known Lorraine for almost 50 years, since she was a college student who babysat David while I taught school. She'd gone on to become a paralegal, and though she was retired now, she still had the sharpest mind of anyone I knew. "Lorraine," I whispered, my voice catching, "I need help." There was a pause. "What's wrong, honey? You don't sound like yourself." And then it all came pouring out. The deed transfer, the basement, the locked door, the labeled food, and finally the phone call I'd overheard. By the end, I was crying so hard I could barely speak. That little dot. Lorraine didn't finish her sentence, but I could hear the anger vibrating in her voice. "I'm coming over, right now. Will they be gone for a while?" "David's at work until 6, and Kayla said something about meeting friends for lunch." "Good. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't you worry, Margaret. We'll figure this out." I hung up and pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the first flicker of hope since this nightmare began. Lorraine would know what to do. She always did. True to her word, Lorraine's sensible sedan pulled into the driveway exactly 20 minutes later. I hurried to open the front door before she could ring the bell, some irrational part of me still afraid of being caught, even though this was my home. Lorraine stood on the porch, her salt and pepper hair cropped short as always, reading glasses perched on top of her head, a legal pad tucked under one arm. She took one look at me and opened her arms. "Oh, Margaret," she said as I fell into her embrace. It was the first real human contact I'd had in weeks, and I clung to her like a drowning woman. She smelled like peppermint and paper, familiar, comforting scents that took me back to simpler times. "Let's go inside," she said gently, pulling back to look at me. Her eyes narrowed. "Have you been eating? You look thin." I shrugged, embarrassed. "It's been difficult." Lorraine's mouth set in a firm line as she followed me into the kitchen. "Start from the beginning," she said, pulling out a chair at the table. My table, the one Frank had built with his own hands. "Don't leave anything out." So I told her everything again, this time in more detail. How David had suggested the deed transfer as a way to simplify things and make sure the house stayed in the family. How he'd promised nothing would change. How quickly those promises had evaporated. Lorraine took notes, occasionally asking questions that I wouldn't have thought to consider. Was there a written agreement about my continued residence? Had I received any compensation for the property? Had David mentioned his plans to sell before I signed? The answer to all these questions was no, which made Lorraine's frown deepen with each response. "I need to check something," she said finally, pulling out her tablet. Her fingers flew across the screen as she navigated to the county records website. I watched anxiously as she typed in my address and waited for the page to load. The color drained from her face. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. Lorraine looked up, her expression grave. "The house is listed solely under David's name now, Margaret." And she hesitated. "And what?" "It's in escrow, with a cash buyer." The room seemed to tilt. "What does that mean?" "It means the house is already in the process of being sold. They've accepted an offer, and the paperwork is being processed." Lorraine scrolled down, her lips moving silently as she read. "According to this, the closing date is set for 30 days from now." 30 days, 1 month. The walls of my kitchen, My beloved kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where David had done his homework, where Frank and I had danced on our anniversary, suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. "I'll be homeless," I whispered, the reality of it hitting me like a physical blow. "In 30 days, I'll have nowhere to go." Lorraine reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She turned back to her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something not right about all this. The timing is too convenient. Did David pressure you at all to sign the deed?" I thought back to that day, trying to see past the haze of trust and maternal love. He was insistent, said it needed to be done right away because of some tax advantage that was expiring. "And did he have you sign anything else? Any other papers besides the deed?" I closed my eyes, trying to remember. There had been a stack of papers. I'd signed where David pointed, trusting him completely. What a fool I'd been. "Yes," I admitted. "Several papers. I didn't read them all. He said they were just formalities." Lorraine's eyes flashed with something, anger, determination, I couldn't quite tell. "We need to get copies of everything you signed, and we need to do it fast." Panic rose in my chest, making it hard to breathe. 30 days. After 45 years in this house, I had 30 days before I would be forced to leave. Where would I go? What would I do? My small teacher's pension wouldn't cover rent anywhere decent. "Lorraine," I said, my voice small and frightened, "is there anything we can do?" She squeezed my hand, her gaze steady and fierce. "There's always something we can do, Margaret. Always. And that son of yours is about to learn that he picked the wrong women to mess with." I waited until Lorraine left before confronting David. Her parting words, "Don't show your hand yet," echoed in my mind as I heard his key in the front door that evening. My stomach knotted as his footsteps crossed the living room above me. I'd spent hours rehearsing what to say, but now that the moment had arrived, my mouth felt dry as cotton. Gathering what little courage I had left, I climbed the basement stairs and entered the kitchen. David was there, his back to me as he rummaged through the refrigerator. I noticed he was pulling items from the side Kayla had labeled with their names in thick black marker. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." He turned, a bottle of beer in his hand, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something harder. "About what, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "About the house, about what you're doing." He twisted the cap off his beer, the small metallic pop punctuating the silence between us. "And what exactly am I doing?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were watchful, calculating. "You're selling the house," I said plainly. "Our home, the one your father and I built together." David took a long swig of his beer, then leaned against the counter, my counter, where I'd rolled out Christmas cookies and birthday cakes for him his entire life. "It's not our home anymore, Mom. It's mine. You signed it over, remember?" "I signed it over because you said it would stay in the family. You said nothing would change." My voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion I was trying to hold back. "Things change," he shrugged. "Opportunities come up. That's life." The casual dismissal of everything, our history, his promises, my future, sent a wave of heat through my body. "This isn't about opportunities, David. This is about betrayal. You lied to me." Something flickered in his eyes, irritation, perhaps even guilt, but it was quickly replaced with a cold amusement that I'd never seen on my son's face before. "Betrayal?" He laughed, a bitter sound that felt like ice water down my spine. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? This is business, Mom. Smart business. It's my home, I insisted, feeling tears threatening. I blinked them back, refusing to let him see me cry. Not anymore. His voice hardened. You should have read the papers before signing. You gave it up, Mom. The cruelty in his tone stung deeper than any legal blow. This wasn't my son speaking, at least not the son I thought I'd raised. Who was this stranger wearing David's face? But you promised. Promises aren't legally binding, he cut me off. Signatures are, and yours is on every document needed to transfer full ownership to me with no conditions or reservations. I felt my hands begin to tremble. What about me? Where am I supposed to go? David took another swig of his beer, looking at me over the bottle with cool detachment. That's not really my problem, is it? I've been generous letting you stay this long. Generous, I echoed, disbelief washing over me. This is my home. Was, he corrected, was your home. Now it's mine to do with as I please, and what pleases me is selling it for a very nice profit. He set his beer down and crossed his arms. Look, I'll give you some money from the sale, enough for a deposit on a small apartment somewhere. The casual way he discussed throwing me out, as if I were an old piece of furniture he was magnanimously offering to help move, made something snap inside me. I'm not leaving, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. David's expression hardened. You don't have a choice. Without a written lease, you're just a guest here, Mom, not a resident with rights. A guest? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. That's right. He picked up his beer again, clearly considering the conversation over, and guests eventually leave. With that, he walked past me and out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors that Frank had installed by hand the summer before David was born. I stood there alone, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than ever in the empty kitchen. The magnitude of what had happened, what was still happening, settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had no legal power, no recourse, and worse, it seemed I had no place in my own family anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place by the weight of my new reality. Eventually, I made my way back down to the basement, each step feeling heavier than the last. In the dim light of my basement prison, I looked around at the few possessions I'd brought down with me. The photo albums, the quilt my mother had made, Frank's old cardigan that still smelled faintly of him if I buried my face in it. With trembling hands, I pulled an empty box from the corner, one of the many that had been stored down here for years, and began to pack. Each item I placed inside felt like saying goodbye to a piece of my life. The silver frame with David's kindergarten photo, the ceramic mug Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary, the small wooden bird my father had carved before he died. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the crystal vase David and Kayla had given us for Christmas years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, carefully packing gifts from the very people who were now forcing me out. As I wrapped the vase in newspaper, a tear finally escaped, landing on the newsprint with a small dark splash, then another and another, until I was sitting on the cold basement floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, sobbing silently into my hands. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the place where Frank had carried me over the threshold, where I'd brought my newborn son home, where I'd nursed both my husband and my mother through their final illnesses. Every corner held memories that couldn't be packed into boxes or relocated to some anonymous apartment. But what choice did I have? David had made it clear I had no legal right to stay, no recourse against his betrayal, just 30 days to dismantle a lifetime and somehow find a way to start over at 70 years old. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and reached for another item to pack. One box at a time, one memory at a time. That was all I could manage now. I stopped going upstairs altogether after that night. What was the point? Every time I saw David or Kayla, I felt the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me like a physical thing. The cold glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. It was all too much to bear. The basement grew colder as October deepened, or maybe it was just me. Hard to tell the difference anymore between the chill in the air and the one in my heart. I wrapped myself in an old Afghan and spent hours staring at the small window near the ceiling, watching the light change and fade, day after day. Kayla started leaving a plate of food at the top of the basement stairs. Like feeding a stray cat, you didn't want to get too comfortable. I'd wait until I heard her footsteps retreat before climbing up to retrieve it. Cold meatloaf, congealed pasta, leftovers that weren't good enough for them, but apparently fine for the old lady in the basement. Just until the sale closes, I heard David tell her one evening when they thought I couldn't hear. Then we'll be done with all this. Done with all this. Done with me. My phone rang several times a day. Lorraine. I watched it vibrate against the small folding table I was using as a nightstand, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What would I say? Hello, Lorraine. Yes, I'm still here in the basement. No, nothing's changed. My son still wants me gone. I'm still too pathetic to do anything about it. The shame was worse than the betrayal somehow. I'd spent my whole life being capable, teaching children to read, nursing Frank through cancer, managing a household on a teacher's salary, and now here I was, duped by my own flesh and blood, unable to even fight back. One message from Lorraine broke through my fog briefly. Margaret, please call me back. I've been looking into some options. There might be something we can do. Options? What options could there possibly be? I'd signed away my home with my own hand. David had made that abundantly clear. I let the phone go to voicemail again and turned back to the task of sorting through Frank's old tools. He'd been gone 10 years now, but I'd kept everything. The worn wooden handles of his hammers, the screwdrivers with tips bent from that time he tried to fix the furnace himself. Each tool held the memory of his capable hands. The toolbox itself was a heavy metal thing, dented on one corner from when he'd dropped it while fixing the roof. I ran my fingers over the dent, remembering how he'd sworn, then laughed at himself. Good thing it wasn't my head, he'd said, winking at me. God, I missed him. Frank would never have let this happen. He would have seen through David's scheme in an instant. As I folded a dusty canvas drop cloth that had been tucked underneath the toolbox, something small and metallic caught my eye. It had fallen from somewhere, landing on the concrete floor with a tiny clink. A key. Small brass with a faded tag attached by a thin metal ring. I picked it up, turning it over in my palm. The tag had writing on it, faded but still legible in Frank's neat block letters. SDB, First National. Safety Deposit Box, First National Bank. My heart gave a sudden lurch. The safety deposit box. How could I have forgotten? Years ago, how many? 20, 25? Frank had rented a safety deposit box at First National. Just for the important stuff, he'd said, the just-in-case documents. I remembered teasing him about it. What are you hiding in there? Love letters from secret admirers? He'd laughed, pulled me close. The only love letters I care about are the ones you used to slip into my lunchbox. We'd gone together to set it up, both of us signing the paperwork. But after that, it had been Frank's domain. Once a year or so, he'd mention going to check on things, make sure everything was in order. I never gave it much thought. And after he died, well, there had been so much to deal with: the funeral, the medical bills, the endless paperwork of death. Somewhere in all that, the safety deposit box had slipped my mind entirely. Until now. My fingers closed around the key, feeling its weight. What was in that box? Tax documents? Insurance policies? Whatever it was, Frank had thought it important enough to keep secure. For the first time in days, I felt something stir inside me. A tiny spark of, what? Hope? Curiosity? I wasn't sure, but it was something other than the dull ache of betrayal and shame that had become my constant companion. I placed the key carefully on the table beside my cot and lay back staring at the ceiling. My mind was suddenly racing. Was the box even still there? It had been 10 years since Frank passed. Did banks keep safety deposit boxes indefinitely? Would they even let me access it after all this time? And most importantly, could there possibly be anything in that box that might help my situation now? My heart pounded harder as possibilities unfurled. Frank had always been so careful with our affairs, so meticulous. If anyone would have protected us, protected me from something like this, it would have been him. That night I slept with the key clutched in my hand, its edges leaving an imprint on my palm. For the first time since overhearing David's phone call, I slept deeply, without the fitful tossing and turning that had become my nightly routine. The next morning I woke with purpose. I showered in the tiny basement bathroom, dressed in clean clothes, and even put on a touch of lipstick. The face that looked back at me from the small mirror was tired, lined with worry, but there was something else there too, a glimmer of determination. I picked up my phone and dialed Lorraine's number. She answered on the first ring. "Margaret, thank God, I've been so worried." "I'm sorry," I said, my voice rusty from disuse. I couldn't talk about it." "I understand," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "How are you holding up?" "Not great," I admitted. "But I found something last night. A key to a safety deposit box Frank kept. I'd completely forgotten about it until now." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A safety deposit box? Do you know what's in it?" "No idea, but it might be important. Frank called it his just-in-case box." "Just in case of what?" Lorraine asked, a new energy in her voice. "That's what I need to find out," I said, looking down at the key in my hand. My fingers tightened around it, feeling its potential. It might be nothing, but right now it feels like my last hope. The next morning, Lorraine pulled up in her sensible blue sedan right at 9 o'clock. I'd been waiting by the basement window for 20 minutes already, clutching my purse with the safety deposit key tucked safely inside. My stomach was in knots, half hope, half fear. What if there was nothing useful in that box? What if this was just another dead end? I hurried outside before Lorraine could even honk. The spring air felt almost foreign against my skin after so many days confined to the basement. "You look better today," Lorraine said as I climbed into the passenger seat. Her eyes, sharp behind her reading glasses, missed nothing. "I don't know about that," I said, smoothing down my cardigan. I'd chosen my navy blue one, the one Frank always said brought out my eyes. I needed to feel him with me today. "But I feel something, like maybe there's a way forward." Lorraine squeezed my hand before putting the car in drive. "That's good enough for now." The drive to First National was quiet. I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood slide by, wondering if I'd soon be forced to leave them behind forever. 28 days left until closing. The thought made my chest tighten. "What if they won't let me access it?" I asked suddenly, voicing the worry that had kept me up half the night. It's been so long, and Frank's name is probably the primary one on the account. "You said you both signed the paperwork, right?" Lorraine asked, turning onto Main Street. I nodded. "Then you should be listed as a co-owner, and you have the key. But even if there's an issue, I've got your marriage certificate and Frank's death certificate in my bag. We'll get in, Margaret. Don't worry about that part." That was Lorraine, always prepared, always 3 steps ahead. She'd been that way since she was a teenager babysitting David. I remembered how she'd always arrive with a small backpack of supplies, Band-Aids, snacks, a flashlight. "Just in case," she'd say with a shrug. "Just in case," like Frank and his box of documents. The bank was busy when we arrived, the Friday morning rush in full swing. I clutched my purse tighter as we approached the customer service desk. A young woman with a bright smile greeted us. "How can I help you today?" My voice caught in my throat. It had been so long since I'd done anything like this on my own. Frank had always handled the banking. Lorraine stepped in smoothly. "My friend needs to access her safety deposit box. It's been some time since she's been in." I fumbled in my purse and produced the key, along with my driver's license. It might be under both our names, mine and my late husband's, Frank Williams. The young woman, her name tag read Tina, took the information and tapped at her computer. I held my breath. "Yes, I see it here. Box 247. You're listed as a joint owner, Mrs. Williams, so there's no problem. If you'll both follow me." Relief washed over me. The first hurdle cleared. Tina led us through a security door and into a room lined with metal boxes of various sizes. She used her master key along with mine to open number 247, then discreetly stepped away, giving us privacy. The box was larger than I'd expected. Lorraine helped me lift it and carry it to a small private room where we could examine the contents. "Ready?" she asked, her hand on the lid. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The metal lid creaked as she lifted it. Inside were several manila folders, neatly labeled in Frank's precise handwriting: birth certificates, marriage license, house documents. My hands trembled as I reached for the last one. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Lorraine could hear it. "Here," I said, passing it to her. "You understand legal language better than I do." Lorraine took the folder and opened it carefully. Inside were several papers stapled together. The first page bore the title, Williams Family Trust. "This is it," she murmured, her eyes scanning the document quickly. "This is the original trust document for your home." I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the dense legal text. "What does it say? About the house?" Lorraine turned pages, reading intently. Then she stopped, her finger landing on a paragraph near the middle of the document. "Here it is. The house was placed in a trust when you and Frank purchased it." According to this, the property cannot be sold until both of your deaths, unless... She flipped to another page, then to what appeared to be an amendment, dated just a year before Frank passed away. Unless you provide written consent or permanently relocate to another residence of your choosing. Lorraine looked up, her eyes wide. Margaret, do you understand what this means? I shook my head, afraid to hope. It means David can't sell the house. Not legally, not without your written permission. She read through the document again, then a third time, as if making absolutely sure. The deed transfer he had you sign? It doesn't override this trust. The trust takes precedence. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision. Are you sure? I'm positive. Lorraine's voice dropped to a whisper, but there was steel in it. You've got him, Margaret. He can't sell that house out from under you. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. After weeks of feeling powerless, of being treated like an unwanted guest in my own home, of packing boxes and preparing for homelessness, there was a way out. Frank had protected me after all. He knew, I whispered, running my fingers over Frank's signature at the bottom of the page. Somehow he knew to protect us this way. Frank was always careful, Lorraine said, carefully returning the documents to their folder. And he loved you more than anything. Of course, he made sure you'd be taken care of. We gathered everything back into the safety deposit box, but kept the trust documents with us. As we stepped out of the bank and into the spring sunshine, I felt air fill my lungs deeply for the first time in weeks. The weight that had been crushing me, the fear, the betrayal, the uncertainty, lifted just enough to let me breathe again. What do we do now? I asked, blinking in the bright light. Lorraine smiled, a fierce little smile I hadn't seen before. Now we fight back. Lorraine didn't waste a moment. Still in the bank parking lot, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. Who are you calling? I asked, clutching the folder of trust documents against my chest like a shield. Harold Weiss, best probate attorney in the county and an old friend. She held up a finger as the call connected. Harold, it's Lorraine Bennett. I need your help with something urgent. Yes, it's about a fraudulent property transfer. How soon can you see us? I listened as they exchanged rapid-fire legal terms that flew over my head. My mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Frank had protected me after all. Even years after his death, he was still looking out for me. Tomorrow morning at 9, Lorraine said after hanging up. Harold's clearing his schedule for us. Is he expensive? I asked hesitantly. My teacher's pension wasn't exactly flush with extra cash. Lorraine patted my hand. Don't you worry about that. Harold owes me a few favors, and besides, her eyes glinted with determination. Once he hears what David's done, he'll take this case just for the satisfaction of setting things right. The next morning, I found myself in a tastefully decorated office on the 10th floor of a downtown building. Harold Weiss was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. Mrs. Williams, what your son has attempted is not just morally reprehensible, it's legally actionable, he said after reviewing our documents. The trust is ironclad. Your husband was very thorough. Can you stop the sale? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I can do better than that, Harold replied, already typing on his computer. I'm drafting a cease and desist notice right now. We'll serve it to your son, the listing agent, and the buyer's representative by the end of today. But first, I need to see the sale documents." Lorraine explained that we didn't have access to those. "Not a problem." Harold picked up his phone. "My paralegal can pull the records from the county clerk's office. We'll have everything we need within the hour." True to his word, by noon we had copies of all the paperwork David had filed. Harold spread them across his desk, his finger tracing lines of text, occasionally making notes. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally, looking up at me with a grave expression. "Mrs. Williams, according to these disclosure forms, your son has indicated that you are deceased." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "In the seller's disclosure, he's checked the box indicating the property was inherited due to the death of all previous owners." Harold turned the paper so I could see it. There it was in black and white. My son had legally declared me dead. My hands began to shake. He told them I was dead? My own son? Lorraine wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "That's fraud, isn't it, Harold?" "Unquestionably." Harold's voice had hardened. "And not just civil fraud. This crosses into criminal territory. False statements on real estate documents, attempting to sell property without legal right, misrepresentation to buyers." He shook his head. "This changes everything." Over the next 3 days, Harold moved with remarkable efficiency. He prepared and delivered the cease and desist notice to David, the real estate agent, and the buyers. He filed emergency paperwork with the county to halt the sale and place a legal hold on the property. He contacted the State Real Estate Commission to report the fraudulent listing. "The sale has been stopped," he informed me on the 3rd day when I visited his office for an update. "The buyers have withdrawn their offer and are considering legal action against your son for misrepresentation." I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt hollow. "What happens now?" "Now we go on offense," Harold said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've initiated a formal investigation through the district attorney's office. Real estate fraud is taken very seriously, especially when it involves taking advantage of elderly family members." "I'm not elderly," I protested weakly, but my heart wasn't in it. Harold smiled kindly. "Of course not, but the courts take a dim view of children trying to swindle their parents out of their homes, regardless of age." He showed me the paperwork he'd filed, legal language that boiled down to one thing: David was in serious trouble. "The DA's office is already looking into it," Harold continued. "They'll want to interview you, of course, but with the documentation we have, they have plenty to work with." As he spoke, something shifted inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, but alongside them grew something else, a quiet, steady anger. Not the hot flash of rage, but something cooler and more powerful. My hands, which had trembled for weeks with fear and uncertainty, now clenched into fists on my lap. Not in fear this time, but in determination, in power. "What about David?" I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "What will happen to him?" Harold adjusted his glasses. "That depends partly on you. As the victim, your cooperation with the investigation will be crucial. If you choose to pursue criminal charges, he could face significant penalties, possibly even jail time for fraud. And if I don't?" Even without criminal charges, the civil implications are severe. The Real Estate Commission will likely revoke the listing agent's license for participating in fraud. The title company will blacklist your son, and any future attempt to sell the house without proper documentation will be flagged immediately. I nodded, taking it all in. The house I had nearly lost, the home Frank and I had built together, where we'd raised our children, where I'd expected to live out my days, was being pulled back from the edge of being lost forever. "There's one more thing," Harold said, sliding a document across the desk toward me. "This is a petition to remove David as a beneficiary of the trust, based on his actions. If granted, it would remove any claim he has to the property, now or in the future." I stared at the paper, feeling the weight of what it represented. This wasn't just about stopping the sale anymore. This was about holding my son accountable for what he'd done. "I'll need some time to think about that," I said finally. Harold nodded. "Of course. But whatever you decide, Mrs. Williams, know this: the law is firmly on your side." As Lorraine drove me home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding that key in Frank's toolbox. Hope. Not just hope that I wouldn't lose my home, but hope that justice would be served. "What are you thinking?" Lorraine asked, glancing over at me. I looked down at my hands, still clenched in my lap. "I'm thinking it's time David learned that even old teachers know how to fight back." I slept that night in the basement, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a prisoner. The legal papers from the safety deposit box were tucked safely in my purse, and Harold's words echoed in my mind. "The law is firmly on your side." I'd spent my entire life playing by the rules, being the good mother, the supportive parent. I'd never imagined I'd need legal protection from my own son. Yet here I was, clutching documents that proved David had tried to sell my home right out from under me while I was still living in it. Morning light filtered through the small basement window when my phone rang. It was Harold. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted you to hear this from me first," he said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The buyers have withdrawn their offer completely." My breath caught. "They have?" "Yes, once they learned about the legal dispute and the potential fraud investigation, they wanted nothing to do with the property. Their attorney contacted me directly this morning." I sank down onto my old recliner, relief washing over me in waves. "So the sale is off?" "The sale is off," Harold confirmed. "Your home is safe, at least for now, but there's more." "More?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "The buyer's attorney has filed a complaint with the State Bar Association regarding David's conduct. As a licensed attorney involved in real estate fraud, particularly against a family member, he's facing some serious ethics violations." I closed my eyes, torn between vindication and a mother's instinct to protect her child even now. "What does that mean for him?" "It means the state bar will launch a formal investigation. At minimum, his license could be suspended. Depending on what they find, disbarment isn't out of the question." The words hung in the air between us. Disbarment, the end of the career David had built his entire identity around. Part of me wanted to feel triumph, but instead I just felt hollow. How had we come to this? "I understand if this is difficult for you," Harold said gently when I didn't respond. "He is your son." "Yes," I whispered, "he is." I was still sitting there, phone in hand, when I heard the front door slam upstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded across the ceiling, followed by the sound of keys jangling and the basement door being flung open. David stormed down the stairs, his face flushed a dangerous shade of red, his tie askew. He looked nothing like the polished attorney who'd calmly told me I should have read the paperwork before signing it. "Do you know what you've done?" he shouted, standing at the bottom of the stairs, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I set my phone down slowly, watching him. The anger radiating from him would have terrified me just days ago. Now I simply observed it, as if from a distance. "The buyers pulled out," he continued when I didn't answer. "My broker just called me. They're threatening to sue me for misrepresentation." His voice cracked slightly. "My own mother. How could you do this to me?" I stayed silent, studying the man before me. My son. The little boy who'd once cried when he found a bird with a broken wing in our backyard. The teenager who'd stubbornly insisted on driving me to doctor's appointments after his father died. When had he changed? Or had this version of him always been there, just waiting for the right moment? "Say something," he demanded, taking a step toward me. "What would you like me to say, David?" I asked quietly. "That I'm sorry I didn't let you sell my home without my knowledge or consent? That I'm sorry I discovered you told people I was either dead or permanently relocated?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "It wasn't like that. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, surprising myself with my steadiness. "I understand that you took advantage of my trust. I understand that you were willing to make me homeless to line your own pockets." "You would have been fine," he protested, but his voice had lost some of its fire. "We would have found you somewhere to live." "Like this basement?" I gestured around us. "Is this where you plan to keep me until you could ship me off to some facility? Out of sight? Out of mind?" David ran a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. "The bar association called me," he said, changing tactics. "Do you have any idea what this could do to my career, to my reputation?" I thought about my own reputation, the decades I'd spent teaching children, volunteering in the community, being someone people could count on. I thought about how quickly David had been willing to erase all of that, to erase me. "Yes," I said simply, "I do." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes besides anger, fear, uncertainty, the realization that he might not be able to talk or charm or bully his way out of this situation. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting to something almost pleading, "we can work this out. Between us, we don't need lawyers and investigations." I shook my head slowly. "It's too late for that, David." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed back up the stairs without another word. The door slammed behind him, but he didn't lock it this time. The next morning, Lorraine came by with coffee and bagels. We sat at the small card table I'd set up in the basement, and she updated me on what she'd learned from her contacts. "The State Bar has officially launched an ethics complaint," she confirmed, stirring cream into her coffee. "They're taking it very seriously. Apparently, they've received the documentation from Harold and the buyer's attorney." I wrapped my hands around my mug, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. "What happens now?" "They'll conduct an investigation, interview all parties involved," Lorraine explained. "But from what I've heard, it doesn't look good for David. Using his legal knowledge to defraud his own mother? That's about as clear an ethics violation as it gets." "Will his license be suspended?" I asked, still trying to process it all. Lorraine nodded, her expression solemn. "Almost certainly. And depending on what else they find when they start digging, well, it could be worse than that." I closed my eyes briefly. Despite everything, the thought of David losing the career he'd worked so hard for brought me no joy. "I saw him yesterday," I said quietly. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear. "Good," Lorraine said firmly. "He should be afraid. What he did was not just cruel, it was criminal." I nodded slowly, knowing she was right. Yet the mother in me still ached for the son I'd lost, not to the Bar Association's investigation, but to his own choices, his own greed. "You know," Lorraine said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand, "sometimes the hardest lesson we can teach our children is that actions have consequences." "Even when they're no longer children," I murmured. "Especially then," she replied. A week later, I was sitting at my little basement card table when I heard the front door slam with such force that the pipes above me rattled. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap, followed by heavy footsteps stomping across the floor upstairs. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. David was home early, very early. My heart quickened as I set my mug down with trembling hands. Something had happened, something significant. I could feel it in the weight of those footsteps, in the way he moved through the rooms above me like a storm gathering strength. More footsteps, then silence. Then the unmistakable sound of something being thrown against a wall. I sat very still, listening. Should I go up? Should I stay down here in my little corner of exile? The basement suddenly felt safer than whatever was happening above. After about 20 minutes, I heard the front door open again. Lighter footsteps this time. Kayla. The door closed with normal force. For a moment there was silence. Then it began. "What do you mean, suspended?" Kayla's voice carried clearly through the old heating vents. I hadn't realized how well sound traveled through them until that moment. "How could you let this happen?" David's response was too low to make out, but the tone was defensive, agitated. "I don't care what your excuses are." Kayla's voice rose higher. "Do you realize what this means? All our plans gone. The new house in Lakewood, gone. My renovation budget, gone." I winced, pressing my hand against my chest, where a dull ache had formed. So that's what they'd been planning to do with the money from my house. Buy a bigger one in the upscale Lakewood neighborhood. "It's temporary," I heard David say, his voice finally loud enough to carry. "Just until the investigation." "Investigation?" Kayla's laugh was brittle. "David, you committed fraud. You told people your mother was dead or in a home somewhere when she was literally living in your basement." I flinched at the words. Hearing it stated so baldly made my stomach turn. My own son had declared me gone, erased, while I was still very much alive. "Lower your voice," David hissed. "She might hear you." "Oh, now you're worried about her feelings?" The sarcasm in Kayla's voice could have cut glass. "You should have thought about that before you tried to sell her house out from under her." Their voices moved away from the vents, becoming muffled. I sat frozen, heart pounding, as their argument continued in another room. Occasional words drifted down, humiliated. "Career, your fault." But I couldn't follow the full conversation anymore. Until the shouting started again. "This isn't what I signed up for." Kayla's voice was clear once more, pitched high with fury. "I married a successful attorney with a future, not someone who's about to be disbarred for exploiting his elderly mother." Elderly. The word stung more than it should have. Is that how they saw me? Some decrepit old woman to be managed and moved around like furniture? "Where are you going?" David's voice again, suddenly alarmed. "Where do you think? I'm not sticking around for this disaster. Call me when you've fixed it, if you ever do." A door slammed so hard I felt the vibration in my bones. Then came the sound of a car starting, tires squealing as Kayla drove away. Silence fell over the house, thick and heavy. I sat in the dim light of my basement, wondering what would happen next. Part of me, a small wounded part, felt a flicker of satisfaction that David was facing consequences. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad for all of us, for what we'd become. That night I lay awake on my narrow basement bed, staring at the ceiling. The house above me was eerily quiet. No footsteps, no television, no voices. Just silence. Until around midnight when I heard it, a sound so raw and broken that at first I didn't recognize it as coming from my son. David was crying, not quiet tears, but deep, guttural sobs that seemed wrenched from somewhere primal. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block it out. My heart couldn't take it, the anger, the betrayal, the hurt, and now this terrible grief. No matter what he'd done, he was still my child. And hearing him in such pain twisted something deep inside me. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of locked doors and empty rooms. I woke to sunlight filtering through the small basement windows. The house above was silent. I checked my watch, 9:30 a.m. Usually David would be at work by now, and Kayla would be doing whatever it was she did during the day. But after last night, I made myself a cup of instant coffee and sat at my card table trying to decide what to do. Should I go upstairs? Stay down here? The uncertain ground between us felt treacherous. After an hour of silence, I gathered my courage and climbed the basement stairs. The door at the top wasn't locked. It hadn't been since the legal proceedings began. I pushed it open and stepped into the kitchen. The house felt different. Empty somehow, though I knew David must still be here. His car was in the driveway. I moved cautiously through the rooms, noting small changes. Kayla's decorative pillows were gone from the couch. The fancy coffee maker she'd insisted on buying was missing from the counter. When I reached the hallway to the bedrooms, I hesitated. Then I heard a soft snore coming from David's room. The door was partially open, and I could see him sprawled across the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, his face puffy from crying. I turned away, giving him privacy in his distress. That's when I noticed my old bedroom door standing open. I approached slowly, hardly daring to hope. When I stepped inside, I stopped short, my breath catching. The room was empty, completely empty. No trace of Kayla's home office, no designer furniture, no boxes of their overflow possessions. Just my old room with the faded wallpaper I'd chosen 30 years ago, and the marks on the doorframe where we'd measured David's height as he grew. It was mine again. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd tended for decades. The morning light caught on the bird bath my husband had installed our first spring in this house. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. David had lost his law license, at least temporarily. Kayla had left him, and I had reclaimed a small piece of what was mine. I sat on the windowsill, watching a cardinal land on the feeder outside. The house was quiet around me, waiting. For what? I wasn't yet sure. I stood in my reclaimed bedroom, letting sunlight warm my face. The emptiness felt like possibility. For the first time since giving up the deed, I could breathe again. "One step at a time," I whispered, touching the worn windowsill. That afternoon, I went to the basement with purpose. My old recliner, bought when I was pregnant with David, sat forlornly in the corner. Though faded and worn, it held my shape perfectly. "You're coming back upstairs," I told it. I called Mrs. Abernathy, whose son Kevin came with a friend to help. They carried it up the narrow stairs. "Where would you like it, Mrs. Jenkins?" Kevin asked, breathing hard. I pointed to the spot by the living room window where Robert read Sunday papers and I'd nursed David. Perfect, I said. David stayed in his room throughout. I heard him moving occasionally but didn't knock. Some wounds need time. That night I slept in my own bed using sheets from the linen closet. Though the mattress was new, Kayla's doing, I was home. I woke before dawn, momentarily forgetting everything that had happened. Reality returned but hurt less. Being in my space was healing. I opened the window to morning air and bird song. Good morning, world. I'm still here. After breakfast at my own table, I retrieved boxes from the attic. One by one, I brought down framed photos, our wedding, bringing David home, vacations, Robert with his prize rosebush. I miss you, I told his smiling face. You would have known what to do sooner. Every nail felt like reclamation. This house, built by Robert, filled with our life, was mine. David emerged briefly at noon, looking haggard. He glanced at me hanging photos, then retreated without speaking. Lorraine called and visited with coffee and pastries. We sat in my living room with windows open. Look at you, she said. You're coming back to life. It feels that way, I admitted, like waking from a bad dream. We talked for hours about everything. Robert, my garden plans, book club, and David. At one point, I laughed deeply, genuinely. God, I've missed that sound, Lorraine said. After she left, I played Ella Fitzgerald records and cleaned methodically, erasing Kayla's touches. The house smelled like mine again, lemon polish, fresh air, jazz, and coffee. I was cleaning the refrigerator when I heard David leave with a suitcase. He didn't look back or say goodbye. That evening, I found an envelope with my name. Inside was one sentence. I didn't know you'd fight back. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. No apologies, no explanations, just acknowledgement that he'd underestimated me. I returned to cleaning my home. I woke the next morning to birdsong and sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, waiting for the familiar weight of dread to settle over me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The house was quiet, not the oppressive silence of isolation, but the gentle stillness of solitude. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling the soft cotton sheets against my skin, and took a deep breath. The air smelled fresh, clean, like possibilities. Well, Robert, I whispered to the framed photograph on my nightstand, it's just me again. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded to the window. Drawing back the curtains fully, I unlatched the window and pushed it open as wide as it would go. The morning breeze rushed in, carrying with it the scent of blooming lilacs from the bush Robert had planted for our 20th anniversary. Standing there, feeling the sun warm my face, I realized something profound. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely, not anymore. Downstairs, I made coffee, a full pot, not just a single cup, and carried it to the porch swing where Robert and I used to watch the neighborhood wake up. The familiar creak of the chains as I settled in felt like an old friend welcoming me back. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson," called Mr. Peterson from next door as he collected his newspaper. He waved, seeming genuinely pleased to see me. "Haven't seen you out here in ages." "Good morning," I called back, raising my coffee mug in greeting. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" It was such a simple exchange, but it filled me with warmth. I was part of the world again, visible, present. After breakfast, I wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along the walls, reacquainting myself with every corner. In the living room, I pulled out more of Robert's old records and selected one of our favorites, Nat King Cole. As unforgettable filled the house, I closed my eyes and swayed gently to the music. How many evenings had Robert and I danced to this very song? Right here, in this room, with the windows open and the curtains billowing in the evening breeze. The memory didn't bring pain as it once might have. Instead, it wrapped around me like a comfortable sweater, warming me from within. Later that afternoon, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs. I hadn't been down there since reclaiming the upstairs. Part of me wanted to shut the door and forget it existed, but another part knew I needed to face it. Taking a deep breath, I flipped on the light and descended the steps. The basement looked different somehow, smaller, less threatening. The thin mattress still lay in the corner where I'd slept all those nights, and a few of my boxes remained stacked against the wall, but it no longer held power over me. I walked to the small window and wiped away a cobweb, letting in a shaft of sunlight. It wasn't a dungeon, it was just a basement. And it, too, was mine. "You were my prison," I said aloud, my voice steady. "But now you're just a reminder." I spent the next hour sorting through the remaining boxes, deciding what to keep and what to donate. Each item I handled was a choice, to hold on or let go. By the time I climbed back upstairs, I felt lighter, unburdened. That evening, Lorraine called to check on me. "How's the first day of the rest of your life?" she asked, her voice warm with affection. I curled up in my recliner, watching the sunset paint the living room walls gold. "Peaceful," I told her. "I never thought I'd feel this way again, but I'm happy, Lorraine, truly happy." "You earned it," she said firmly. "Don't you ever forget that." After we hung up, I sat in the growing twilight, thinking about everything that had happened, about trust and betrayal, about weakness and strength, about how sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're made of. The next morning, I woke early with a sense of purpose. After breakfast, I put on my gardening gloves and headed out to the backyard. The flower beds Robert and I had once lovingly tended were overgrown, choked with weeds. Kayla had shown no interest in maintaining them, and I'd been too preoccupied with survival to care. But now, kneeling in the soft earth, pulling weeds and turning soil, I felt connected to something essential. With each root I loosened, each patch of ground I reclaimed, I was rebuilding more than just a garden. By midday, my back ached and my knees protested, but the main flower bed was clear. Tomorrow I would buy new plants, maybe those purple coneflowers Robert always liked, and some bright yellow black-eyed Susans. The garden would bloom again, different but beautiful in its own way. Inside, I washed the dirt from my hands and made a simple lunch. As I ate, I gazed around my kitchen, and felt a deep contentment settle over me. The house was no longer just walls and a roof. It was home again. That evening, as the sun began to set, I took Robert's favorite sweater from the closet and wrapped it around my shoulders. Then I opened every window in the house, letting the evening breeze flow through like a cleansing breath. I put on another record, Ella Fitzgerald this time, and the sweet notes of blue skies floated through the rooms. Standing in the center of the living room, I closed my eyes and simply existed in the moment. The music, the breeze, the fading warmth of the day on my skin, all of it a testament to survival, to resilience. The basement was still there beneath my feet, it would always be there. But it had taught me something invaluable, that even after the deepest betrayal, a woman can rise. That strength often comes when you have nothing left but yourself to rely on. Opening my eyes, I gazed around at my reclaimed kingdom. Light filled every corner, chasing away the shadows of what had been. The silence was no longer lonely. It was sacred, a space I had earned through tears and determination. This house, with all its memories, both bitter and sweet, was mine again, and so was I.